I'm Bob Carroll. I'm the Executive Vice President at Permanent Solutions Labor Consultants, and welcome to Employee Relations Words of Wisdom. I'm glad to be joined today by Chuck Krugel out of Chicago, who is a labor and employment attorney for business. And Chuck is here today to talk to us about some of the rule changes that happened. It seemed lightning quick over the last part of 2019 that we need to be ready for and perhaps rewrite our handbooks back to the way they were before Obama took office. So Chuck, why don't you just give us a real quick mile-high view of what's going on in labor and the NLRB and what changes have happened?
Well, and I guess to put it succinctly, it looks like they're loosening things up for employers. So with the joint employer rule and the time frames or timelines to conduct petitions and elections, it seems like they're trying to, honestly, it seems like they're taking more of a common sense approach as opposed to this draconian union biased approach that they had before.
So what changes do you think have the biggest impact to help employers out?
Well, I think there's going to be more time to respond to petitions now. So as opposed to having like maybe 1 or 2 days to file position statement or a few days in which to post notices and get the election roster and everything else, there's going to be more time to make sure that the election list, the eligible voters, that's done properly and that people have an opportunity, enough time to contest the list of the voters as opposed to just ramrodding this through, which is what happened, I think, during the Obama administration.
Yeah, and they made changes to the ability to get things settled and quashed before before the end of the election. You can actually do that again in the hearing, right?
Yeah, and I think they're giving more leeway to the regional director for the NLRB to basically also make changes themselves that they deem necessary for these elections. Where in the past they would have this sort of very narrow and sort of draconian reliance on these rules and say, well, we can't really change that. It's not up to us. And now I think they're starting to loosen that up too, saying like, yeah, I think we might be able to make some changes. Or if you, the union, and us agree, then we'll go ahead and we'll do this sort of procedure. Maybe change something in the roster or change something in the posting or whatever for the election.
Right. And I think before we started the actual recording of this, we were talking about the joint employer rule. I think that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And let's face it, and Obama had a lot of businesses freaking out. What impact is that going to have?
Well, I think it's going to dampen the effect that that predatory lawyering has had on a lot of these businesses. So you have a lot of predatory plaintiffs out there, predatory attorneys out there looking for class action lawsuits in the wage, hour, conditions of employment in those areas. And they go after the larger chain, the entire franchise, in order to get to the deep pockets. And now that's going to be a little bit more difficult with this 4-part test. That's kind of like the broader area of it, or the broader part of it, but they have this new 4-part test that they're implementing to determine whether or not it's truly a joint employer relationship.
And what about the gig economy? I'm throwing a curveball at you here. We didn't discuss it, but what do you think is going to happen with the gig economy? That's obviously something that, if you look in California, what's happening out there, it's something that is not out of the union's minds right now. They're still looking for ways to make that happen. What do you foresee in that?
I think that's also going in favor of the employers to some extent. I think employers now have a better opportunity to argue before the NLRB or before other regulatory agencies that these are truly independent contractors. That they have the option to work for multiple ride sharing or multiple tech companies, whatever, in the gig economy, that they could do multiple delivery organizations like Grubhub or whatever the other names are, Blue Plate, whatever. So I think there's more of a individualized and more of a deeper assessment going on relative to who's an independent contractor and who's an employee, as opposed to just saying if you work for a ride sharing company, you're automatically an employee.
Yeah, I think it's important to go back to what you previously said about things. You have more time to react. I want to make sure that the people that see this understand you as an attorney have more time to react. The employers have to react immediately. They need to get attorneys like you involved right away, figure out what's going on in their own situation, because as you know, every union campaign has their own different nuances. If they're going to use consultants like us, they need to get us on the ground as soon as possible so we can start talking to the employees. What about the one of the things under the Obama administration that was so frustration was getting that list of employees so quickly.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you're hit by a union campaign, you have more time to get that list completed now. I
Yeah,
know you took
there's
the
more.
email off.
Yeah, there's more acknowledgement that employers just don't have, even with better IT in 2020, that employers still don't have access to all employee files and documents, because a lot of, there's some employers that are multi-location. So this gives them a little bit more time to get that information together. Also, they have more time to get an attorney now too. I mean, not significantly more time, but a little bit more time before they have to get that position statement and the letter of representation into the NLRB. So there is a little bit more time there. Ironically, I had an election petition in late November, early December, and it took like 10 days from not 10 days from filing, it took about 2 weeks, maybe 14 days from filing to getting that dismissed. But we were running around like during the Thanksgiving holiday and Black Friday, like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to get this going and in process. And I even said that to the NLRB. I'm like, we weren't really contesting, and we weren't even contesting an election. We were just contesting 5 versus 3 employees in the
Wow.
bar so it was a small employer. And finally, it was dismissed, but it still took a lot of jumping through hoops and basically saying to these guys, look, push has to come to shove. If you still want to quibble over these other 2 employees, fine, but you're just hurting the other 2 employees, and
Right.
this runs counter to this whole democracy, workplace democracy sort of thing.
Oh,
So
yeah. Well, I mean, think about a company with even 40, 50 employees,
yeah,
let alone somebody big like say Volkswagen, who, if a supervisor under the Obama administration had that person's contact information, that supervisor was required to turn it over. How are you supposed to deal with that? And it became a logistical nightmare. I mean, people were bringing
oh
people
yeah.
in to help just gather that information and enter it into the specific format that you needed to turn it into the board. It was insane.
Yeah, they've also, I think they're loosening up on that format thing, because I think the format, it had to be, you had to submit it to them in Word, MS Word,
Yes.
and an MS Word table, and all
Certain
the
font
stuff.
size, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think now they're allowing PDFs, because I remember in this last petition, I did send them some PDFs, and those were accepted. Because I told them, well, like, frankly, I'm a little concerned about MS Word anyway, because that's more easy to edit than a PDF. Not that anybody behind our backs would go and edit these things. I mean,
Right.
there's no unscrupulous union people out there or anybody like that. But it was kind of I was kind of glad to see even something as common sense oriented as that.
Yes.
PDF acceptable.
So, is there any other changes that you foresee coming forward in 2020?
I think that I think the elections are gonna decline in the private sector. I'm assuming, because based on the current trend of labor and employment law, and I think in the public sector it's going to increase. Although now today I just heard on NPR a story about the e-gaming industry and how they're talking about unionizing the e-gaming industry.
I don't often do this, but I'm going to go against one of the attorneys on my show. I think it's going to go up.
You think
I
so?
think
In the
we got
private sector?
yes, we got the gaming industry, you got tech industry, and hey, you're in Illinois, marijuana.
Yeah, also I've heard, yeah, you're right. I heard about that one too. That's right. Not just from you. We talked about this last week, but I mean, now I'm starting to see some newspaper articles and yeah, more mainstream media articles about unionizing the marijuana industry.
Right,
Yeah,
and
so you might be right about
yeah, I also think the UAW had a huge victory. I mean, that strike was it was really bad, but I think it opened up a lot of people's minds. I read an article not too long ago that said, I believe, and don't quote me on the number, but 60% of Americans support the idea of belonging to a union. That the new generation is more likely to join a union than somebody, say, in my generation.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's really going to carry through to the ballot box when they actually have to start voting for these things, because it becomes a different dynamic than when you actually have to put pen to paper and vote. I mean, there's because I've seen a lot of increase too in the worker associations. Like these are not labor unions, but these are kind of like a precursor to the labor unions. They do a lot of the uh, hand billing type stuff, the pamphleting and all that, trying to organize workers for wage and hour disputes, and they've been pretty successful in like predictive scheduling and informed scheduling, predictive work week laws, and getting the minimum wage increased, and also paid sick leave or paid time off. So yeah, I mean, in that regard, they've been somewhat successful, but I still wonder when you have to put pen to paper and actually file a vote for a union if people are going to really go for that.
I think it's going to be an interesting year. First of all, it's
Yeah,
a election year,
yeah,
and are the union people that support unions going to go for Trump again? We don't know. Uh,
yeah.
it's an election year, so the unions are putting a lot of money behind whatever candidate they choose, and we all know who that is. I mean, what side of the table that is. And it's an election year, so they have to prove that their money is worth something, that they have value.
I
So yeah,
think
I think it's actually going to go up.
maybe we've both been around long enough to know. I think that a lot of what we've heard about like the big time elections, like Obama versus was it Romney, or Obama versus McCain, or Clinton versus was the first Bush, or Bush versus Gore. That these were, yeah. I mean, every election's important, but I don't think those were like ground change or groundbreaking elections necessarily, except for maybe the Obama election when he beat McCain for the first time. But I think this election is really important because we're seeing the class warfare thing really ratchet up, and we're seeing people really ratchet up their efforts now against Trump. Ironically, though, Trump's even loosened up again also the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and has actually made that more palatable for employees now, because the minimum wage for the exemption, the overtime exemptions, is going to increase.
Correct, correct.
You
It's going to
know,
be an interesting year, no doubt about it.
this is an important year. This is actually an important election for us, I believe, and even on out the local levels and everything, because of the change in marijuana laws, and in Chicago, like we've seen the election of our with first gay black mayor. We've had a black mayor, but it's the first gay black mayor, who's also a female, which is also a big deal. So I mean, we're seeing a lot of changes, big, huge changes. So
Yeah, it's a whole new world. I mean, if you would have told me 5 years before Obama that we'd be in the world we're in today, I would have called you nuts. But
if you'd asked me 25 years ago if still be doing union work in 2020, I'd probably tell you probably not, unless I was doing
right,
public sector work. But it's still 40% of what I do. So
yeah. So I think that covers anything else that you are aware of that change that may impact businesses for the good or bad.
well, I don't know if this is going to be good or bad yet, but I think the changes with the NLRB and the NLRA itself is going to also impact the local labor relation agencies. Like in Illinois, we have the Illinois Educational Labor Relations Board and the Public Employee Labor Relations Board, which handle like police, education,
Correct.
emergency services, and all that. So that's also a huge deal, especially in Chicago. And I've seen in other cities now increasing around the nation too. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with these public sector unions and organizations, especially also in the aftermath of Janus in the education sector.
And you guys kind of led the way. I mean, look at the teacher
It
strike.
started from Illinois.
You had that teacher strike in Chicago that
Yeah.
everybody was paying attention to.
Well, Janus started in Illinois. He's a former, I don't know if he's a Chicago teacher, I remember, or a suburban Chicago teacher, but yeah, it's been a big deal in Illinois.
Yeah. So I I really just wanted to thank you for coming on. It was a short
Thanks
and
for having
sweet
me.
episode. I would love to have you on again.
Love to.
Pay attention to the marijuana industry there in Illinois. We're watching here in Michigan too. I don't know if you're following it, but I believe in Illinois they're trying to follow or semi-follow what's going on with California with the labor peace agreements.
Yeah, that's right. They have had the labor peace agreement here, but I haven't. I mean, so far all we've seen or all we've heard about is just some media stories that it could happen here,
Right,
and but it
same as
hasn't.
Michigan. Yes, Yes, but
I don't know if it's going to be the Teamsters or operating engineers or some AFSCME or something like that. But
interesting enough, I just read an article, and I think you just named all of the above.
Oh, really?
Well, you think about it, you got the transportation, you got the people that cultivate it, the people that sell
Yeah.
it, the people, you got the people that operate the machinery and maintain the machinery. It can get, I mean, I'm predicting marijuana is going to be a very big thing for the unions, and they're going to go after them hard.
Yeah, but it's not good. I mean, marijuana and labor unions, I think it's kind of an oxymoron because you have to be aggressive to be in a union. And I mean, marijuana, it kills your short-term memory and it makes you less aggressive and all that. So we have a bunch of stoners, protesting in front of some public buildings about unionizing, but they're going to have a tough time, I think, if they're all stoned themselves or under the influence, trying to convince people.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it's going to be an interesting year, and those are the ones I say to watch: tech, gaming, and marijuana.
Yeah, the e-gaming thing was interesting to hear about today because that's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people just still don't have a real good handle on how to approach it and really what it's about. All the different players and all that. So
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I appreciate having you on the show.
thanks, Bob. Appreciate being here.
I hope to have you on again, especially when things get exciting there in the Illinois area and in Chicago. I wish I had you for the teacher strike. And I would like to remind everybody to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell notification. That way we can notify you when new content becomes available. And I would just like to thank you for watching this week's episode of Employee Relations Words of Wisdom.
Likewise. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks, Bob.
All right.